Well, as you've no doubt heard, Nigel Farage has become the first British politician to meet the US President-elect. Donald Trump and the interim UKIP leader discussed freedom and winning, according to a senior advisor. Well, let's speak to Douglas Murray, associate editor at The Spectator, who joins us from our Westminster studio. Good to see you, Mr. Murray. It is something of a coup, isn't it? Nigel Farage, considered for so long to be on the fringes of British politics, having a meeting that any politician worth their salt would give their right arm for.
Well, yes, it is. It is a great coup for Nigel Farage, but hardly an unexpected one. Throughout Donald Trump's campaign, and certainly in recent months, Nigel Farage has actually put himself front and centre. He's spoken at Donald Trump rallies. He's rallied for Trump, and it's inevitable, I suppose, that somebody who had showed Mr. Trump such support would be favoured with an early meeting. It's also not at all surprising, is it, that that Mr. Trump may feel differently about people who were very vocal the other way in this election. All political leaders and all successful political leaders reward people who have been loyal to them and don't reward people who haven't. And so this country finds itself in a rather curious position, doesn't it?
Certainly, and of course, perhaps not just the first British politician, according to Raheem Kassam, the first politician to have a sit-down meeting with Donald Trump, all of which does rather flag up the fact that, as we've heard over the past few days, that perhaps our diplomats don't enjoy quite as close a relationship with Team Trump as they might well do.
Oh, yes, I think that's certainly the case. And this country, by the way, has been, and our politicians have been, quite amazingly undiplomatic in these regards. There are all sorts of criticisms to make about Mr. Trump, and there are all sorts of criticisms to make about his rival for the presidency, Hillary Clinton. But it was a very strange thing in our country's politics that when Donald Trump was down to the last two people who were going to be president at some point this year, when he was down to the last two, British politicians continued to not just criticise him, as was right, but to insult and lampoon him. Don't forget that our country's parliament spent an entire afternoon earlier this year debating an effort to try to ban Donald Trump from entering the country. During that debate, SNP politicians, Labour politicians, Conservative politicians, all queued up to sort of demonstrate and compete against each other as over who could be more rude about Mr. Trump. SNP politicians described him as just an idiot. Things like that. Really high-flown debate, really worthwhile discussion, really good use of our taxpayer money to have a debate like that. Our politicians seemed to delight in this. They thought they got so many points on social media from thinking up the rudest insult of, as I say, somebody who was one of the only two people who was going to become president of the United States this year. And looking back at that, it strikes me that a lot of people should be thinking a bit about their approach. People can have all sorts of criticisms, and people on social media and so on do, but our elected representatives can't just be social media trolls or Facebook warriors. They're actually our representatives in Parliament, and they're meant to be representing our country. And one of the very important things that entails is to build good relations with people who are going to be our allies. And whether you wanted Hillary Clinton to win or Donald Trump to win, it is simply the fact that Donald Trump had a very large likelihood of winning, and people should have treated him with some degree of seriousness once it looked likely that he was going to get that position, or, as I say, was one of two people likely to get that position. And I think it is an enormous embarrassment for this country that advisors to our Prime Minister, senior politicians, members of the Cabinet, and numerous members of Parliament have put this country in a situation where, as I say, it's not just criticising the Republican nominee, but just seeming to delight in being as offensive as possible about him. I don't think that's good politics.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Murray. Well, on that basis, I mean, you mentioned there, the two chiefs of staff that Theresa May currently owns reportedly making disparaging comments about Donald Trump on social media. Any number of politicians, as you pointed out. Does it then follow that there perhaps should be a role for Nigel Farage to act as something of a go-between, be it formal or informal?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would have thought it's very unlikely that he would get any formal role because relations between him and number 10 will be not particularly warm. But I think that it's just inevitable that somebody who enjoys the confidence of the president-elect of the United States of America does play some kind of informal role. I wouldn't have thought it would get much more than that. But as I say, Nigel, we are in a strange position. Nigel Farage has built a better relationship with Donald Trump than the British government has. And that the point I want to make is that was unnecessary that was the case. The British government did not have to be starting almost from scratch at this stage. As it is, of course, they won't be from now on because they'll be working up at the moment alliances with the people in Donald Trump's team. It's not just about the number one, it's about the transition team. It's about numerous members of that team who will have relations with some senior members of the British government. I'm thinking of people like former Mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, Governor Chris Christie and others. There will be relationships that can be built upon. But it just would be better, I think, in future if our elected representatives and their advisors and others remember that there is all of the difference in the world between diplomacy and the arts of politics and the arts of being a bore on social media.
Well, one does then, Mr. Murray. We've seen diplomatic misstep after misstep. You'll have seen the front pages of the Sunday papers today. Sir Kim Darroch's assessment of Donald Trump as being open to outside influence. That doesn't strike me as particularly helpful to have in the public domain, then.
No, I mean, there are all sorts of things like this going on. If you just look, I mean, if you look through the American newspapers today, the ones that were backing Clinton are still being as sore as possible, and people who've been critics of Donald Trump are still being as sore as possible. The Scottish First Minister continues to seem to be as sore as possible. Alex Salmond, the same thing. I mean, these people will flip, of course. I mean, remember that when Donald Trump wanted to do business in Scotland, Alex Salmond slathered and lathered him with praise and friendliness and all that horrible jokey jocularity that Alex Salmond puts on at a moment's notice. And then, of course, the moment Alex Salmond thinks that Donald Trump has said something that he doesn't find agreeable with, he turns against him. These people will flip with whatever direction they think the wind is going. And if they think they need Trump again, and it is very likely they will need the leader of the world's most important and powerful nation again, they will reverse some of that. It's just taking some people a bit longer than you might expect. I suppose it's part of the shock. Most people expected Hillary Clinton to win, but as I say, I mean, the role of government and diplomacy is not just to have the same predictions as everyone else, but to prepare and to be able to prepare for different outcomes than those that people expect.
Alex Salmond slathering and lathering Donald Trump. What an image to leave us with, Mr. Murray.
Sorry about that.
Douglas Murray, thanks very much for joining us.